One beautiful spring, a man arrived at the gates of heaven. "Welcome," St. Peter said. "Would you like a tour?" "Of course," the man replied. "That would be fantastic." "Lovely," said St. Peter, "but we must remain very quiet." "Oh, well, sure," the man replied. As they made their way through the beautiful streets, they passed one room and the man asked, "Who are those people in there?" St. Peter replied, "They are the Methodists." They passed another room. The man asked the same question. "Oh, those are the Baptists." They make their way through the streets, passing room after room. They find another room, and the man asks the question again. And this time St. Peter answers, "Those are the Anglicans." They approach the next room. St. Peter says, "And these are the Catholics." One by one, they passed room after room for Mormons and Jews and Muslims and pagans and Presbyterians and all manner of Christian denominations. "This is great," the newcomer exclaimed in an excited whisper. "Everyone's here. So why do we have to be quiet?" St. Peter said, "Shh. They all think they're the only ones here." You may have heard versions of this humor at some time or other, so have I. I grew up hearing it in various Christian settings. About 20 years ago, I heard it from a Jewish friend, and just this past Monday evening, right here at River of Grass, at the Jamanal gathering, get Jamanal meaning Jews and Muslims and all, that River of Grass is pleased to ally with and host here once a month. This was our last gathering of the year until the fall. Finally, at Jamanal this past Monday, I heard it from a Muslim friend. Actually, I first heard that heaven joke told by my gospel preacher father, which got him promptly in trouble with the elders of our church for even hinting that others besides our very proudly small Christian denomination were eligible for salvation. And salvation is the primary mission and message of the religion I grew up with. Now come forward with me to about a decade ago. At a leadership symposium gathered for UU congregations in the Southeast, for purposes of a theological encounter, we were sent out into groups from the large auditorium. We were sent out into classrooms in small groups and given 5 questions to discuss, whereupon we would return to the larger group and we would all share our discoveries together. We were given 5 questions in 90 minutes. 90 minutes later, let's see, our group was a settled Unitarian Universalist minister, myself who was in seminary about to graduate. There were several lay leaders from other congregations in various roles. I didn't know them personally. There were about 9 of us all told. We took our 90 minutes, rejoined our group or our cohort to report that we had not even made it past question number 1. Sounds Unitarian Universalist, huh? So what was question number 1 that we wrestled with so mightily that we couldn't even get an answer to it agreed upon amongst ourselves so we could move to question number 2? Here was question number 1. What is Unitarian Universalism's saving message? What is Unitarian Universalism's saving message? Now we know that our Unitarian Universalist denomination, our tradition, is 2-branched. We have Unitarianism and Universalism that joined up in the mid-20th century, 1961. Both began as reformers of early Protestantism. The saving message notion comes more dominantly from one branch, our Universalism. Both early Unitarians and early Universalists sought to further reform the Protestant Reformation, itself born of Martin Luther and John Calvin, who aimed not to start a new religion, but to reform corporate Catholicism. And when corporate Catholicism refused, Protestantism was born. Protestantism. Then Unitarianism and Universalism sought to further reform this Reformation. They came at it two different ways. Unitarians argued against the Trinity, insisting on the unity of one God, and Jesus as a divine man, but not himself God. Universalists didn't argue so much about the Trinity, but they insisted Jesus' mission on earth was to assure humanity that God's love was universal and available to all. And they said, all means all, which got them into a great deal of trouble with Protestantism, with Catholicism, and initially with the Unitarians and other liberal denominations. Universalism catapulted straight out of evangelical Christianity. The father of American Universalism is a hero of mine by the name of Hosea Ballou. Now, little Hosea was born into a New England Baptist family with Calvinist roots. His father was a Baptist Calvinist gospel preacher. Now, for those of you not familiar, Calvinism is a theology, a Christian theology that teaches that salvation is limited, that only 144,000 souls will be saved, and that those souls are elect and predestined for salvation. So those who are elect can't do anything to unsave themselves, and those who are not elect can't do anything to save themselves. Now, in Hosea Ballou's era, there was also a strain of Calvinism that was even more strict and more limited to 1 in 1,000 people expected to be saved. And again, those predetermined and predestined. Now, Hosea Ballou followed his father into this Baptist Calvinist evangelical ministry. He was also reading the writings of emerging Universalist preachers of the time. This is the late 1700s. Caleb Rich was one, and he challenged Caleb Rich to a debate and declared him a raving heretic for suggesting that salvation might be open to all. Now listen, the idea of universal salvation was not new, even in the late 1700s. It had been declared a heresy since the early days of Christianity, was taught in the 2nd century by a theologian named Origen, who was declared a heretic, got himself condemned, kicked out, unable to preach, for teaching that all created beings were eligible for salvation in the end. So there was young Hosea, newly baptized into his father's Baptist evangelism, studying the Bible fervently alongside the writings of Universalist preachers in order to disprove them. But don't you know, 6 months later, he was stricken in his heart with the message of universalism, and he began preaching universal salvation to anyone who would listen, which got him promptly excommunicated from his father's church and Baptist Calvinism and Protestantism in general. Those of us who have been excommunicated knows how that feels. But Hosea Ballou went right past it. His heart was so lifted by the notion of a universal love, of a universal God. And he took this to the road, preaching on horseback through the wilds of New England. Now he had a different problem. Certainly conservative evangelical Christianity condemned his theology, but he also faced challenges from the liberal church. Baptists didn't approve, still don't. But neither did the Unitarians of the time. The one derided, "You mean to say God welcomes all into heaven?" The other declaimed, "You mean to welcome all manner of people in amongst us? You mean to say they are coming in here?" Not the prettiest part of our history, and one that we still have vestiges of and that we work to overcome. Now come forward with me again to the mid-20th century and the rise of religious humanism. Along about the same era, Unitarians and Universalists merge into what we have inherited as Unitarian Universalism. With the strengthening of religious humanism in the 20th century, we found our Universalist heritage itself meeting its own divide. A divide between the established religious universalism and a sort of new humanist universalism. Now, religious universalism says there is no hell, everybody goes to heaven. A more humanist universalism says there is no heaven, not only no hell, hell is what we make on earth and what is our duty to rectify. It's important to note that no version of universalism purports to know what, where, or how heaven is, just that it's perfect and it's not here. It might be easiest to amplify these seemingly disparate definitions of universalism with hymns, which we do well to remember are some of our most potent theological statements. First, a hymn in our hymnals from established religious universalism, which may be familiar to you. We're going to Shall We Gather? There. Let's sing together. Shall we gather at the river, where bright angel feet are trod, with its crystal tide forever flowing by the throne of God? Yes, we'll gather at the river, places its hope in a place of eternal beauty. Humanity transformed by the love of God at the river that flows by the throne. We means we in this hymn, though I did grow up singing it believing that we surely only meant the faithful we in church that Sunday morning. Not the grace the hymn celebrates for all. Now consider this message, also from our hymnals, coming forward to the late 20th century. This hymn to universalism places its hope in the beauty of community. Humanity transformed in love and justice on earth as we pledge ourselves anew to our higher calling. Now, these two universalisms, the one rooted in evangelical Christianity in its beginning and the other rooted in humanism, some view this as the great universalist divide. That humanist universalism must, and religious universalism must necessarily be at odds, given that one holds for our life after this one, and one holds for no life after this one, but this one universally available to all, and the other a universal eternity available to all, and to humanism, universal love available on earth, and no assurance of anything after. Honestly, my beloveds, I don't see this as a divide. I think the very heart of universalism of any kind teaches that there need be no divide at all. Neither kind of universalism insists that the other must agree. That's the nature of universalism. If you believe in something after this life, that's good. If you don't, that's good too. We're all saved in some sense either way because there is no hell. And that is a good news gospel I can preach. Could I get an amen for that? Amen. Could I get an amen? Amen. You see, it's the Unitarian side of our history that sits politely and listens. And the Universalist side says, Amen! Thank you. Now, there's another aspect of universalism that we need to deal with. One proposed, well, because there's one purpose of a belief in hell, and that's the ability, sometimes the satisfaction, that we might experience in wishing someone would wind up there. Especially if they have caused us pain and suffering, or pain and suffering for others in the world whom we care about. You know the comment, there's a special place in hell for, fill in the blank with whatever heinous behavior has hurt you. Or, oh, go to hell, for those you wish to just dismiss or demean. But true universalism, our universalism, does not provide for this. Our first principle insists on the worth and dignity of all persons born inherently. All persons. As Unitarian Universalists, we don't get to condemn nor dismiss even those whom we fear may destroy all we hold dear. We don't get to damn them. But that does not mean we are not called to stop them. We do not get to condemn them. But that does not mean that we give them free rein that hell may establish itself on earth. So let me ask you, what is Unitarian Universalism's saving message? And if it is not salvation from a non-existent eternal hell, then what does it save us from? What does that mean to you? And is that what brought you here this morning? If there is a heaven, cool. We'll gather at the river there, just like we do here. And we won't have to be quiet, because everybody will know that everybody's here. And then we can rejoice together at all of the people in our lives that say, fancy meeting you here.